Oh, awesome. Got some freebies with this case. I wonder what it is. Oh, wait. There's nothing in here. What's going on? So today I'm going to be building a poker themed gaming PC. It's not a gaming PC in the traditional sense, it's actually a server, and these are all the parts I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using 32 gigabytes of Crucial RAM. I also have an RX 580, which is a Fat Boy edition, packing 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Next up, I've got an X99 ASRock motherboard, which has a lot of features included on that board, and I have a 650 watt power supply kindly provided by GameMax. Finally, 512 gigabytes, which is going to be used for the OS system and also some storage. I have a CRT case which has 4 addressable RGB fans, and finally I have some good preparation that I'm going to be doing with this case. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this poker mat. I've cut it to size so it fits exactly and nicely into that slot, and I've used adhesive to glue the mat into place. Now, working from the front of the mat to the back, I slowly peeled it backwards and forwards until it fitted nicely into the case and it had a really nice flush finish. Next up was sorting out the motherboard. Because the motherboard is old, I didn't feel it was right to leave the same old pads in place, so I took off all the heat sinks off the motherboard and I decided they needed a change. They were pretty old and I can imagine those MOSFETs were probably getting quite warm. So removing that, I put on some new thermal pads and I then replaced the heat sinks back onto the motherboard so that it would work better than it did when I was testing around with some of my older videos. So here I'm going to be using my Xeon processor version 32696, and this is packing 18 cores and 36 threads. The processor is an absolute monster and it should be perfect for a poker server. Next I needed to install the M.2 drive, so that was pretty easy to do by removing the screw and then inserting the drive itself into the slot. Next up I installed the I/O cooler, and here I used a 240mm rad, which gives excellent cooling for the Xeon processor. And the reason why I'm installing it now is because I always like to bench test everything just to make sure everything is working perfectly, and as you can see I was getting a post which is perfectly fine. Then it was a job of installing the power supply. Here I've got 650 watts, which is more than enough to power the GPU and the Xeon processor, and that was a simple case of just slotting it in the bottom of the case and screwing it in. So I decided to 3D print these rubber washers that will go between all the fans and the case, and in this respect it would reduce the noise inside the chassis. So here you can see the setup that I have for the fans on the front, and also I'd added additional fan on the top of the case and also the back. So in terms of the fan configuration, I've actually got the air being pulled through the back of the case and the top, and then being pushed out the front, so that the hot air from the radiator isn't being pushed inside the case. What I needed to do with this graphics card, although it seemed like it was in really good condition and there was barely any dust inside the GPU, I decided to take it apart and I renew all of the parts inside. In terms of the parts that I have inside the GPU, I decided to replace the thermal paste and also the thermal pads. All of those were replaced and simply put the GPU back together, and it was as good as new. Now, when installing the thermal pads, you want to make sure that you have all the VRM heat sinks covered, and it's always a great idea to take a picture of the GPU taken apart first so you remember where the pads need to go. So I've installed the I/O cooler and the motherboard inside the case, and the next thing was simply to slot the GPU in. It's always a great idea to have the M.2 in place already, because once you put the GPU in, there's no way in hell that you're ever going to reach the M.2 drive. So slotting that in place and screwing it in, you can see there's a little bit of a sag, so I thought I could address that by again using the poker set, and I thought maybe I could use the poker chips as a bit of a GPU bracket. Now, switching on the PC for the first time, I think it looks absolutely amazing and I love the look of the case. The only thing is that the inside looks a little bit barren, and also those wires look a little bit whack. So what I wanted to do was add in a bit of customization. So I 3D printed the guy's logo and I made a little poker chip that could go onto the back of the fans, which came out pretty good actually, and it just adds a little bit of character to the PC. So I just used a hot glue gun to glue that into place. On the back of the fans, you don't want that on the actual fan blade itself because it will make a massive racket. So gluing that in, I think that looks really great. The next thing I did was I glued a whole load of poker chips together and I turned it into a GPU support bracket, which goes perfectly with the theme. So although the case looks great, the thing is the power cable into the motherboard looks whack and I hate the look of it, and I need to really figure out how to sort that out. What I wanted to do was to add a little few accents onto the bottom of the case. So I glued some more poker chips together and I drilled a hole through the middle, and that was for me to be able to put an LED light through the middle of that. And then also I printed a customized chip that would go on top and it would shine through so you'd see the logo on the bottom. I made 2 of these so that they would be on the bottom and they would add a bit of character to the case. As you can see there, where I have the old power cable going into the motherboard, I've actually 3D printed the guy's logo, painted it, and I screwed it over the power cable. So it hides the power cable, and overall I think the result looks great. So here's a little montage of the PC and I hope you like the video.